Hello, boys and girls. Our reading lesson for today is to define the role of the author and the illustrator. Do you remember what the role of the author is? The author is the person that writes the story or writes the book. What about the illustrator? Do you remember what the role of the illustrator is? The illustrator is the person that draws the pictures to illustrate a story or a book. Today's lesson is going to be so much fun. I'm going to read a book to you that I wrote, and I was the author and I was the illustrator. And then after our lesson, I want you to make your own book. So I want you to become an author and write a story, and an illustrator and draw pictures to go along with your story. The story that I wrote was about possums. Do you remember how possums always come to my house to eat cat food? Well, one time when my granddaughter Lydia was visiting me, she was only 2 years old, and a possum came to my house. After that, every time she saw me, she would say, "Grandma, what was that possum doing at your house?" So I finally decided I would write a book so Lydia would always know what the possum was doing at my house. This is the book that I wrote for Lydia, and I hope you enjoy it. The name of my book is Lydia and the Possum, the Never-Ending Possum Story. And down here at the bottom, it says written by Grandma, because I wrote the story for her, and I wrote it because I was her grandma. And I also drew the pictures. And on the inside, I wrote, "This book was written for Lydia so she will know what the possum was doing at my house." And after I read this story, you're going to know what the possum was doing at my house too. One day, Lydia went with Mom and Daddy to Grandma's house. Lydia liked to go to Grandma's house because there were so many things for her to play with. Grandma had lots of toys and books. Grandma also had pets at her house. She had 2 dogs. Samson was a big dog, and Scooter was a little dog. Grandma had cats at her house too. Lydia liked to play with the cats. And there's Samson and there's Scooter. They were the dogs that I used to have. Lydia knew there were dogs and cats at Grandma's house, but Lydia didn't know that there was a possum that lived in the woods at Grandma's house too. It was a hungry possum that loved to eat cat food. Every night it would wait until everyone had gone to sleep. Then it would creep out of its house and look for something good to eat. And there's the possum up there. It lives in the woods behind my house. One night, the possum lifted its nose into the air and sniffed. It smelled cat food. "My favorite," he said. Very quietly, it crawled tippy-toe up to Grandma's house. It sniffed again and smelled the cat food on the porch. The cat food smelled so good to the possum. He looked all around for Samson and Scooter. Nope, he didn't see them. He sniffed to smell Samson and Scooter. Nope, he didn't smell them. Then he listened to see if he could hear Samson and Scooter barking. Nope, he didn't hear them either. There he is. Uh-oh, look where the possum is now. So the possum climbed up on the porch and began to eat the cat food because he was very hungry. The cat food was so crunchy and delicious that it made the possum smile. But the possum wasn't smiling very long. Uh-oh, I wonder what's going to happen. Samson and Scooter smelled the possum on the porch. They barked and barked. Samson and Scooter did not like the possum to eat the cat food. "The possum is on the porch eating cat food," Samson barked. "The possum is on the porch eating cat food," Scooter barked. "Stop, possum, stop," Samson and Scooter barked. They barked and barked and barked. Samson started turning in circles at the door because he was so excited. Scooter jumped up and down. They were making a lot of noise. Grandma heard the dogs barking. She didn't know the possum was outside. She didn't know what the dogs were saying either. Grandma just thought Samson and Scooter wanted to go outside and play, so she opened the door. Samson and Scooter were so excited to see the possum on the porch eating the cat food. They ran outside barking and jumping and turning in circles. Uh-oh. That poor little possum, look, it's trying to get away. This is a true story. This really happened at my house. But the possum was not excited to see Samson and Scooter. He jumped off the porch and tried to run back to his house in the woods, but he could not run very fast. Samson and Scooter chased the possum all around the yard. They wanted to bite the possum's pretty pink tail. Poor little possum. The possum climbed up in a bush to hide, but Samson and Scooter were not tricked by that possum. They could smell him hiding in the bush, so they barked and barked. "We found you," they barked. "We found you, we found you." They kept running around and around the bush barking, "Get out of our bush, get out of our bush." The possum wasn't hungry anymore. In fact, he was very, very scared. He just wanted to go back to his home in the woods. That poor little possum, do you see him hiding in the bush right there? But he was too scared to come down because Samson and Scooter were still running around and around the bush trying to bite his pretty pink tail. "Leave me alone," growled the possum. "Leave me alone. Don't bite my pretty pink tail." Poor little possum. Uh-oh, I wonder what happened. The possum was so scared he got very still and closed his eyes. He thought that maybe if Samson and Scooter thought he was asleep, they would go away and leave him alone. Then he could climb down out of the bush and go back to his little house in the woods where he would be safe. So he's pretending he's asleep. He's playing possum. Have you ever heard someone say you're just playing possum? That means you're pretending to be asleep, but you're really not. In the house, Lydia could hear the dogs barking. "Why are Samson and Scooter barking?" she wondered. She went outside to see what was happening. Lydia saw Samson and Scooter running around the bush. She heard them barking. Then Lydia heard something growling. Look! There was a possum in the bush. Grandma did not like Samson and Scooter barking at the possum. She did not want them to bite the possum's pretty pink tail. "Go back in the house," Grandma said. "Leave that poor little possum alone. Don't bite his pretty pink tail." Finally, Samson and Scooter went back in the house. They were tired after their possum hunt, and they went to sleep. So there they are. They're going back inside. The possum stayed up in the bush and pretended to be asleep for a long, long time. He listened to hear Samson and Scooter, but they were not barking anymore. He sniffed the air to smell Samson and Scooter, but he didn't smell them anymore. Finally, he opened one eye and looked around. Then he opened the other eye and looked around. The possum didn't see Samson and Scooter either, so he slid down out of the bush. There he is. He's coming down. He crept tippy-toe across the yard. He crept tippy-toe back to his home in the woods. At last the possum was safe. He would have to wait until tomorrow to come back and eat more cat food. Grandma and Lydia went back outside to see if the possum was still in the bush. They crept tippy-toe over to where the possum had been hiding. They looked through the leaves and under the branches. The possum was gone. Then Lydia asked, "Grandma, what was that possum doing at your house?" And Grandma said, "Please turn back to the beginning of this book and read it again." So this is the story that I wrote. I was the author because I wrote the words, and I was the illustrator because I drew the pictures. Now I want you to write your own book, and you become an author, and I want you to draw pictures to illustrate your story and become the illustrator. Please, if you do write such a wonderful book, will you share it with me? I'd love to hear your story. Have a fun day writing your story. Bye.